All right, guys. This is an Unreal Engine 4 game. It was supposed to come out on the PlayStation 4, but the developers did not ship it. They changed up everything. They didn't give it a later date like other developers have. But at the same time, I wanted to show you another Unreal Engine 4 game that is running on the PlayStation 4 now, which after about a year, the developers have brought the game back to the PlayStation 4. Now, this is Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Thankfully, they went for a PS4 port because it's finally forced them to actually fix the PC port, which was quite damaged at launch. I could not play it. I beat this game on the Xbox Series X via Game Pass, thankfully, because I would have been ticked off if I had to buy it again, and I was looking forward to the game. However, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about next gen and the marketing that has been sold to us. You see, all this stuff about next gen and all, if you actually try to put a finger on what it is, it will mean different things in different contexts and in different scenarios. So what I want to say is anybody who may be dialing into this whole misnomer of next gen, just think about this. The way that they've been making video games for at least a decade is basically the same. Concord that you just got was, the development of that game, that you got and lost, the development of that game started about 8 years ago in a sense. So if you think about 8 years ago, what consoles were available at the time? The PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. Those were the more recent consoles, and the Xbox 360. So the tools that they were using then, even though those tools may have been updated, they're just updated versions of tools that they always used to do the job. So game engine, they can rework, refactor engine, lighting engines, 3D, software like Maya, Blender, 3ds Max, all of the above. These tools have always existed for game developers to be able to, to do the job. Some publishers and some studios will build their own engine or engines like Ubisoft. They have a lot of engines and they can actually rework their engines to be able to at least make whichever kind of game they want to make. Like in the case of Ubisoft Massive, their game was the Division 1, which actually put them in the spotlight, and they used the Snowdrop engine to actually make that game. That engine was actually built in-house. I don't know if it was built for the Division 2 or for the Division 1, or it was actually built when Activision still owned Massive. Yes, Activision used to own Massive before Ubisoft acquired it from them, and then they were helping Ubisoft do, co-development on Assassin's Creed and Far Cry and other games before they cooked up and then fully entered into development of the Division 1 and then subsequently the Division 2. And then there are other engines within Ubisoft that they use for Assassin's Creed, that they use for other games as well in their development cycle. But these tools, all they do is just basically go ahead and update them, and it doesn't really make too much of a difference in a sense as to what it is that the engine is going to bring you that another engine cannot inherently do in a sense. So when people say things like, created, how do they put it with Bethesda? They'll be like, oh, yeah, Bethesda's engine is like outdated and all that. But then they see like, the game, what's the name? The Starfield game and its DLC looks, well lit and looks like, the environment and everything in the world. They look more up to date with today's, visuals. Well, what did they do? Did they change engines? They didn't change engines. They just updated their engine to be able to give you that presentation that it is that you wanted. So the whole talk about next gen in terms of software and games, that's all really, weird in a sense. Like, you can take an old game and update a lot of the game's code to meet and match new software parameters. And they did this with The Witcher 3. Remember, The Witcher 3 was one of those games that by the time it came out, there were, there were very minimal, graphic enhancements you could do as a user to your game. But it wasn't until about a few years ago that, CD Projekt Red took the game and started adding some new enhancements for ray tracing and all of the other things. Well, how did they do that? Well, they just took their game files, they just took everything that they had and then basically worked it to be able to support those capabilities. So the whole talk about next gen and stuff, that's just all, I don't know, that just all needs to be put aside. What I think people who are, in this space who are paying attention to this stuff need to do is spend some time understanding how, these individual studios actually create their games. Some people will say next gen is all about the look, but then I can point to the Order 1886 and that game looked way better than like 80% or 90% of the games that you'll see today. what was the difference in the tools and what was the difference in the hardware that we had. We had old hardware, yet they had a game that just had, in my opinion, one of the best looks I've ever seen. It's just because they chose that style, they chose that rendering style, they chose the art style and the presentation style, and they worked until they could achieve it. That's pretty much how a lot of developers get their visuals, and it has nothing to do with any kind of generation or whatnot. So this is, in my opinion, a very interesting thing that we need to pay attention to. Another crazy thing, too, is the capability of the hardware. I remember when a lot of people kept saying, the Series S was a problem, It's a so-called next-gen hardware, but it can't really play games, and it's holding the generation back, and blah, blah, yabba yabba da. But here we are. The PlayStation 4 is basically capable of still playing games, depending on the developer's prowesses. A developer that chooses to sit there and optimize their game will get their game to play on almost anything. That's why developers are getting their games to play on Nintendo Switch, and that's why they were able to get this game to actually play on a PS4, because it always could if they would take the time to actually, sit there and, optimize the game and make tweaks and make visual changes that would give the game playability at respectable performance, tweak the resolution, all of those things that they can do in order to do it. So as for the Series S, it's quite capable because it's a more powerful, console than a PS4. So if a game like Jedi Survivor can actually run on the Series S, can run on the PS4, it kind of tracks us back to the whole conversation of Black Myth Wukong. I don't think the Series S was the problem for that game. The problem for that game was the optimization. Now, granted, they used Unreal Engine 5.0, which is a much more tougher engine in terms of performance. Epic Games just recently improved the performance with 5.4, but still, you can get your game to run very well. You're going to have to just make sacrifices, and your game is going to look very differently. And so a lot of developers in today's day are just leveraging a lot of the shiny tools, and most of them are not really paying attention to the hardware. And maybe it's not their target hardware, but at the end of the day, I think, this is something that a lot of studios can really, really learn from when they're making their games, to consider really low-end hardware as a really interesting benchmark. But again, the pizzazz, the look, let's make the game look like this, let's make the game look like that, is an alluring proposition for them. And they really want to be able to impress everybody for, the sake of sales and for the sake of generating, interest in their game because of how the game looks. But these are just some of the things that I wanted to just talk about in this video, because I really think it's very important that we kind of get a sense as to how all of this, plays and comes into perspective. But anyways, let me hear your thoughts in the comment section. This is one of those videos where I'm going to make a different version as well. And we're going to talk about maybe hardware. We're going to talk about, PlayStation 5 sales and so on and so forth, because this game really does put a dent to a lot of narratives out there. So thanks again. We'll talk pretty soon in another one. Peace out.